What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Dominic Frisby, financial writer, comedian, actor of unrecognized genius, and voice of many things. He's a writer, performer, a comedian. This year, he's been mostly writing funny songs, dropping the smashingly hilarious anthems for the excommunicated. He's also resident MC at London's oldest comedy venue, downstairs at the King's Head, and at London's grooviest new club, Comedy Unleashed. A financial writer, his latest book is Daylight Robbery, How Tax Shaped Our Past and Will Change Our Future. He's the writer of Bitcoin, The Future of Money, first recognized published book on Bitcoin from a recognized publisher. And his first book was Life After the State, Why We Don't Need Government. He co-wrote and narrated the acclaimed documentary about the global financial crisis, Four Horsemen. He writes a weekly investment column for Money Week, as well as occasional pieces for The Guardian, Virgin, and The Independent. He's also written, produced numerous short films, pilots, and silly videos, among which Debt Bomb became a viral hit. He also co-wrote and narrated the Shadow Punk Revolution. An actor, recent appearances include the In-Betweeners movie and the lead role in an Irish drama for TG4 about the life of political revolutionary Erskine Childers. Voiceover, he's one of the most prolific VOs in the UK, voicing many documentaries, ads, promos, trailers, cartoons, and he's president and CEO of private investment company Cypherpunk Holdings. Welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast, Dominic. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me, Cedric. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, this is wild. Someone who's listened to the show kind of pointed you out to me, and I really hadn't come across you before, to be honest. And so I just jumped to your Amazon page, and I saw the first two books. I ordered them right away, and then I ordered the third book. And it's like funny with the shipping, you don't always get them in the order that you order them in that day. But now my perspective is you're just kind of you label people and you get siloed, and I'm thinking of you of this like hardcore economist out of somewhere in the UK, old and poshy, and not old in age, but just kind of like an old school economist. And then I jumped to your website, and then there's just so much going on there. But then and there's the intersection. You're a columnist from Money Week. So I started the books, and kind of my first touch point, for you is you're landing in Cuba. And I'm assuming the arts came before the economics, but I don't know. So how'd you end up in Cuba as a young man?
Well, this is a very long time ago. This would be probably 1993. No, it might have been 94 or 95. It was about a year or two. It wasn't quite. If the absolute sort of nadir of Cuba, Cuba's lowest point came when all the boat people were fleeing across the Florida. It was about a year or two after that, so things were still pretty grim there. And I'd done a deal with myself in my early 20s, which was that I spent 6 years in college, and that was just way too long. I went to university and then I went to drama school, and I'd always wanted to go traveling. And I was like, when I was in my early 20s, I was thinking, yeah, but you can't go traveling if you've just spent 6 years in college. You've got to go and do some work and start building a career in stuff. So the deal I did with myself was that every year in January, when work was quiet, I could go away for a month. Because by the time you factored in the Christmas holidays, if you left on Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas in the UK, I don't think you call it Boxing Day in the US, and you came back around about the 1st of February, you could end up getting 5.5, 6 weeks in, which would almost be like, you could have a pretty exciting time. So one year I went and spent 5 or 6 weeks in Colombia. Another year I went to Bolivia. I had this love affair with Latin America. I love Latin America. And another time I went to Peru. Another time I went to Brazil. And another time I went to Guatemala. Loved Guatemala. And I thought to myself, you know, you've got to go to Cuba. I absolutely love salsa music more than anything else. And so I went to Cuba, and you know, I had a typical education. My dad was left of center, and I'd always grown up basically thinking that Cuba was the best place in the world, and that socialism worked, and that you know, it had the best education and it had the best health service. And I got there, and I've never been to such a messed up country in all my life. I've never seen anything like it. And when you have, there isn't really much religion in Cuba. It's mostly died away. There's a few sort of old kind of voodoo-y things, but they're not Catholic or Jewish or, you know, Anglican or any of the Christian or any of the. But I found it, the mentality of the people, really similar to. I'd been traveling a lot in North Africa earlier in my life, Egypt and Morocco and other places. But I found the Cubans in their attitude really similar to Moroccans. Now, Morocco at this time, when I went to Morocco, 1990, they have this very tyrannical rule. It's not a free country, but religion is the rule. The church and state are very much combined there. And because Islam in Morocco is so, you know, it's quite oppressive, it breeds this culture where everyone lies all the time. Everyone lies because they're scared of getting into trouble, and everyone's always weaving this. And there's also a fanaticism, and it was there in Cuba as well. The main difference between Cuba and Morocco is that Cuba was by far and away the most promiscuous country I've ever been to, whereas Morocco's not remotely like that. And so, and there was this weird situation where all these Italians were going to Cuba for their holiday, and they were getting off with young black girls in Cuba and having love affairs with these young black girls. And so you had these kind of really glamorous looking, trendily dressed young Italian men all dating black girls. And the black girls there were all jumping on Cuban men. Now, you couldn't get on Italian men. You couldn't get anything in Cuba with Cuban pesos. This is, and people, I still can't understand this because I thought, well, I'll get off the beaten track a bit and I'll be able to use Cuban pesos and I'll be able to get into the real economy. But because it was a communist state, you just couldn't buy stuff. There wasn't stuff to buy. And it was so absurd. And the only way of buying anything like a pair of jeans or something was to go into these government supermarkets that only accepted US dollars. Now, the official exchange rate between the US dollar and the Cuban peso was 1-to-1, but the black market exchange rate was more like 1-to-20. So 95% lower. But the problem was, even if you got Cuban pesos, you just couldn't buy stuff. You just couldn't, no matter where you went. And so you had this economy where everyone was incredibly well educated, but they worked for the government. So you'd have like a top professor or a top engineer or something like that, and he would earn 400 Cuban pesos a month, which was equivalent to like 20 US dollars. And a young black girl, 16, 17, 18, 21 years old, 25 years old, whatever, could earn that in a night, just hanging out. They could earn 5 times that in a night, 10 times that in a night, just by banging some Western guy. And so everyone was so desperate for US dollars that they were all sending their daughters quite happily into prostitution, because it was the only way of getting foreign money. And it was the only way you could buy stuff beyond like the few things that the Cuban government supplied. And so there's no point having a brilliantly educated people if there's no pencils or no paper for them to work with. Well, there's no point having a brilliant health service if there's no medicine or no syringes. So it was this crazy, crazy, hypocritical country. And people would come up to you and they'd go, oh yeah, Castro's wonderful, Castro's great. And then they'd come up to you and whisper, they'd check. Nobody was listening. And then they go, I hate Castro. And then they'd sort of go away. And it was just this weird double life. And it was the most distorted economy I've ever seen, where the highest earners were uneducated teenage girls who were prostitutes, the highest earners in the whole country. And it was the most classic case I've ever seen in real life of a government screwing up a country. Everything was distorted.
Was this earth-shattering to you at the time, considering, you mentioned you grew up in a kind of left of center household and thinking that this would be paradise? Or was this something that maybe resonated after time?
No, as soon as I got there, I was like, this place is messed up.
Was this?
And
No, I didn't say.
when I said within a week,
Right.
at first I went there and I was, expecting to sit around with other Cuban students and talk about, this amazing country they were in, and everyone hated it and everyone couldn't wait to escape. And it was like this great big lie.
When do you start like doing research on economics and trying to get a more, because you have a lot of historical foundation in your books and you cite a lot of history. When did you start like turning into it more academically, just in your own interest?
Oh man, I've been a comedian and a voiceover artist all my life, and I made a bit of money 2006, and I was looking to invest it, and I started reading about gold. Bitcoin didn't even exist back then. But when you start reading about gold and money, you go down a rabbit hole, and I think you struggle to ever come back. I know I struggled to ever come back, because gold, because it was money once upon a time, it's a really political investment. And I started reading about libertarianism. And the first thing I understood is why house prices are so ridiculously overpriced in relation to what people earn. And I started seeing the flaws in the money system. And then as soon as you understand money and leverage and asset price inflation, all these things, everything clicks into place. And I became a rampant gold bug. And I went from being left of center without really thinking about it to militant libertarian.
Right. It's interesting. I guess the way you get, money or hard assets, it's really the problem that it solves for you. And you were looking to store your value that I guess you had created throughout your career. And I wonder, it's interesting with, I would assume, with comedians and actors and things of the arts, there's more ebbs and flows to, cash inflows. And there, you have to do maybe sometimes more practical planning. Because maybe you have like you do a show and you have a season, and then the season's over, and you have to maybe go a few months without maybe starting a new season or something. Do you go?
Yeah, you should. I mean, as a result, you'd think that actors and performers and people who work in the media, as a result of that insecurity, would be great financial planners. But I think they're as hopeless as the rest of us, if not more hopeless. I mean, there are plenty of actors who just go through their whole life skint, and there are plenty of actors who are absolutely really good with money and really careful. And then there's lots of examples of people who start earning good money. Maybe they get a TV series and they just assume it's going to last forever, and it doesn't.
Right.
That's a story that's been told plenty of times.
Yeah. When did you start writing for like Money Week? And
well, what happened is not unlike yourself, Cedric, is when I was trying to learn about gold and investments and everything, like I was too early on all of this. I was just too early, because when you start learning about all of this, I'm convinced that the best way to transfer information is, like, human beings absorb words and language best through the ear. That's how the human brain operates. We absorb information through the spoken word and through the ear. And we only invented writing as a means to transfer information over distance or over time. And we don't absorb information as well from the page as we do through the ear. And I sort of understood this intrinsically, I think, from doing voiceovers. I started listening to loads of podcasts, 2005, 2006. Podcasts just weren't a thing then. And I then realized that the best way to meet all these interesting people talking about gold and stuff, people like Peter Schiff, Peter Schiff was amazing back in 2005, 2006. He was just brilliant on Austrian economics, on gold, inflation. He took the argument to the other side. The problem is, he's just been wrong about Bitcoin. He can't accept he's been wrong about it. And he just won't back down and go, do you know what? I got that one wrong. But anyway, so in the early days then, he was brilliant. I remember interviewing him, Jim Rogers and James Turk. And basically, I started the podcast as a means to get investment advice and learn and talk to these people. Because I figured if I went and met them, I was going to have to pay them an hourly fee or something. But they're all promoting their own brand, same as the rest of us. And so I started this podcast, and one of the people who I interviewed was this woman called Merrin Somerset Webb, who's a top financial journalist in the UK. And she said, "Oh, we need people like you. You should come and write for us." And I said, "I don't know anything about finance or commodities." She said, "It doesn't matter. The best way to learn about it is to write about it." So that's how I started a podcast, and one of the people I met on the podcast gave me a writing gig, and that was coming up for 15 years ago.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's how that happened.
the three books really interplay off each other, really interesting for me. And the middle book, the Bitcoin, the Future of Money, to me reads a little differently than the other two. And I'm kind of curious when because the Bitcoin book was written in 2014. Life After the State, was that like 2011 or 2012? No, it was 2013.
It was published usually you write the book the year before it's published, because it takes, from the time you hand in the manuscript, it takes about 6 months for them to fanny around with all their
So
things that publishers do.
I guess, what was your rabbit hole story with Bitcoin? I mean, I guess it came from gold. I'm really curious about you getting to watch the evolution of Peter Schiff and all the gold bugs. But I'm kind of curious how Life After the State came out before the Bitcoin book. Just in terms of where your thoughts were you, because there's not a lot, there's no mention
I'm pretty sure that, no, I do mention Bitcoin in Life After the State. I give it there's about a page about it, because it just it goes back. There's a film called Four Horsemen, which was a huge internet sensation film, and it was written it was produced in the wake of the financial crisis. And the guy who produced it was a guy called Ross Ashcroft, and he made this film, and he got interviews with all these top guys, Joseph Stiglitz and Noam Chomsky, and all these top bods. And he tried to sort of cobble together. He had this idea for this film, and he was angry, and the economic system's broken. He wanted to fix it, and he'd made this film, and it was just a total mess. It was all over the place. The ideas weren't coherent. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. And Ross came to me and said, "Look, I've made this film, but it's a mess. Can you help me with it?" And I remember I spent about 3 months rewriting the film and re-editing it and putting it all in order and getting all the interviews and getting the whole thing logical. But I was kept saying to Ross, if you're writing a film about reforming the financial system, you've got to have stuff about money in it. And so we made all these videos about fiat money. There was one that was very popular on the internet with all this stuff about the flaws of fiat money, how it creates inequality, all that stuff that we all know now. But so we got the film right. And in fact, if I hadn't been putting so much energy into that film, I would have been going to Bitcoin conferences, and this would have been 2011. I've got my first email when I found out about Bitcoin. It was 20 cents. Oh my God. Anyway, so I went and did that film, and then the film was a huge hit on the internet. Four Horsemen, check it out. It's had like 9-10 million views, something like that. But I fell out massively with Ross Ashcroft afterwards. He didn't credit me properly for the film. I felt like I'd been plagiarized. But what it showed me is that it's possible for some nobody to come along and make a film about huge subjects. So I then started writing Life After the State on the back of that film about, where society's gone wrong, why we don't need government, blah, blah, blah. And most of Life After the State, the first probably half of that book is how we need to fix money. But at that time it was gold. And then Bitcoin came along, and I was like, yeah, or maybe Bitcoin's the answer. And I think Life After the State is the first mention of Bitcoin in a proper book from a publisher. And all the while Bitcoin was going out. And at this point, I was heavily invested in gold and gold mining stocks. And gold mining stock, like all through gold's bull market from 2005 to 2012, it actually peaked in 2011, but it was still high in 2012. There'd been this whole narrative: fiat money's going to collapse, fiat money's going to die, gold's going to replace it, inflation is evil, all those anti-fiat money. And then gold collapsed, and all those junior mining stocks lost like 95% of their value. Loads of them turned out to be frauds. Everything that happened to Bitcoin shitcoins in 2016 was happening in junior mining stocks in 2030. And all the meanwhile, all these Bitcoin was going up. And I was like, everyone's going. And I remember putting a bid to buy some Bitcoin at $1 and it doubled to $2. And I'm like, I'm not buying it after it's doubled. And then it doubled to $4. I'm not buying it after it doubled. You've got to keep your discipline. And it kept going up and up and up. And then they invented these physical Bitcoins. Somebody came up with those, and I remember they bid on the, and I was the highest bidder on eBay. They were like at about $22, and the Bitcoin price, and then they ended up going for like $35, $40. And I'm not chasing it. I'm keeping my discipline, and because I think that junior mining collapse was embedded in my head. I should have just bought, 10,000 Bitcoins, $10,000. Buy hodl, we all know that, and it just kept going up and up and up. And I was like, and I'm like, I know what happens. I know this fiat money narrative doesn't break down. A fiat money, it does not last. And all the while, Bitcoin's going up, going up. And then eventually, I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, I've missed this. If nothing else, I'm going to be the first guy to write a book about it, because then I'll be like the main spokesperson about it. And so I wrote the first book about it. Got obsessed with who Satoshi is. And it's still a very good read. And a couple of the guys who've written later books about Bitcoin, you can see they've mined me like mad. They've borrowed me like mad. But anyway, the book was published. It came out
like it was written this year or last year. It reads very fresh. I had to go back to the copyright date.
Well, you're very kind.
I mean, that's why I was talking about the dates of these things. I was really trying to wrap my head around this, because it reads like it was published just now. And then then I'm going back to your Amazon page, and I'm like, there's a book after, because I'm like, when I saw that it was 2014, I think I had only probably purchased Life After State and the Bitcoin Future of Money book. And now I'm looking at this and I'm like, this one's 2014. And I'm like, oh fuck, when's Life After the State from? 2013 published. All right, there's got to be something else, So then I went back to Amazon and ordered Daylight Robbery, which I got to like maybe a week after or 2 weeks after I ordered the first two, because I came to it later, just looking for more work from you. And what I really love about the Bitcoin Future of Money is it not only does it feel like it's written this year and it explain Bitcoin to you, but the part about Satoshi, which is the bulk of the book in a lot of ways, is so much fun. And the best written piece about the chase and the hunt and the obsession that I've come across. And I have my hunches and my instincts.
I didn't know who Craig Wright was, by the way. I looked at him when I was writing that book,
sure,
and I was going, no, his writing style doesn't match.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. I don't even think he's in the book. And
no, he's not.
Yeah,
I just dismissed him straight away because his writing style doesn't match.
Great.
Kleiman, on the other hand, I'd never heard of.
Yeah, the other people you dismissed was Bigfoot and then Loch Ness Monster. They're not suspects, but they're mentioned. And I'd love to get into a little bit with you.
But can I just say the very funny thing about that book, Cedric, is by the time it was published, it was the first crypto winter when gold went from when Bitcoin went from 1,200 down to 200, and there was so much anti-Bitcoin sentiment that I got it published in the UK, and nobody internationally would publish it. So it never got an international release because it was so. And if I'd written it like a year later,
that's funny. That is
if I'd written a year or two,
horrible.
Well, it's horrible, but it's the way
I understand the disconnect now, over the pond and everything, and why that wasn't seeping into my feed. It just wasn't published here. Maybe.
Yeah, because sentiment was so dire. If it had come out a year or two later when Bitcoin's next bull market,
they should have reissued it.
Well,
they should add a chapter.
But that's just why book. That's why nobody's heard of it outside of the UK.
It's right there in the pantheon with all of them.
I think so, but like Safe Dean's book, he drew a lot on my book. Fair enough, but he timed the timing of his book. The timing of his, he just timed his 2015.
Well, they're very different books. But yeah, in terms of like the things that you get at in your book, I'm like, wait a minute, when did he write this? Wait a minute, we're all talking about this now. When did he write this? And I really kept going back through my mind as I'm reading that book when it was published. It was a really key fact. And then I'm really trying to like, well, if he's on to this in 20, what it comes out after you wrote it, So if he's on to this in 2014 and published in 2014, so he's on to this before this, but in the book, you're going through a long exploration. You're meeting with people, you're having dinners, you're on the hunt for knowledge and clues and just what's going on. So it's been on your mind for a while, and then blew my mind that this is afterlife after the state, which to me is still very different reads. I mean, that to me is like hardcore. We're taking the system down. There's a real problem here, where Bitcoin, the future of money, is a little bit more like, well, I'm going to throw some things at you and let you make up your own mind. I'll explain this and guide you through this softly. It's a very different kind, and where like Daylight Robbery then is kind of a bookend where I feel it's merged for me, where you're pulling on
If I
this.
could write that Bitcoin book again, I'd be much more dogmatic about it.
Well, that's why, you have to look at when it was published.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's but I mean, because it still holds water, and it feels to me like it would come out yesterday or tomorrow, but you still have to know when this thing was published to get the full context of when you were telling this story, and why it was told in a certain way, and why maybe your thoughts and learnings and lessons in Bitcoin and money have even grown and evolved since then, which they obviously have with Daylight Robbery. You're going back for the gut punch again, and you're bringing more back to me. These are foundational things: tax, money, and power in the state. Because Bitcoin is the solution, right? But these are the problems, and that's why they have, I guess, different tones. Because Bitcoin's a little bit more of a, how almost like a help you book, and the other two are like wake up, and it's very interesting too. Then you cross-reference that with what I want to cross-reference is that is, you have a successful a career in the arts, and I wonder a couple of things. One, were you concerned or nervous about kind of taking hard stances against the state and maybe alienating some people who come to you for your art and different kinds of things? Now, mind you, within that, comedians, I think the best comedians speak truth to power. And that's why I think there's a powerful intersection here. But then I'm curious too, like, are your fans separate? Or you got your economics fans, you got your voiceover and your stand-up fans, and then maybe there's some in the middle.
They were. It was all a bit separate before, but now they're blending. I've started writing these songs, and the songs sort of. I've been doing these songs for the last few years.
Hilarious.
And they sort of. Thank you. And they sort of. It all comes together with the songs.
Yeah, they're ballsy.
I think so.
And you do in a in a way that you slip it through, that I feel like you're making your point. You're kind of making a point that wakes people up, but it's still copacetic. It's still he's just saying something that's truthful and interesting, and you get it across. You convey it very well. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, you're very kind, but yeah, I mean, early on, when I was getting into all this stuff early on, I just didn't talk about it at all. The first time I really sort of broached it was 2016. I did a show called Let's Talk About Tax at the Edinburgh Festival, which is a huge arts festival in the UK. And that was sort of a lecture about tax with jokes. And that became this book.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Daylight Robbery, yeah.
So, why do you think Satoshi disappeared?
He died.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
okay.
I mean, by all accounts, it looks like it was the three of them. I've had conversations with Matonis until the early hours of the morning about this. John Matonis, and
I don't know that name, to be honest. It doesn't.
Oh, he's a Bitcoin OG, and he was like the first chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation, and he was the guy who Craig Wright showed his keys to way back when. And I think it was the three of them.
When you say the three, you're talking about Szabo, Finney, and...
No, it wasn't Szabo. I thought it was Szabo in the book, but
in the book, you feel it feels like you think it's Szabo in the book.
Oh, completely.
And I would have pushed back on that.
I don't think it was.
Okay, but who are your three then, if you don't mind?
Well, it looks like there were three of them working together. Dan Kleiman wrote the posts. and he's the guy who died. He was the computer forensic investigator who was in Florida. And
that's the one Wright's fighting with, I think. His family, or is that?
yeah, he's right.
Okay,
Wright's
got
fighting
it.
with
That's
his
the
family.
tie-in. Okay.
Kleiman wrote the posts. Craig Wright wrote one or two of the posts, but like, if you read Satoshi's posts, he wrote 88,000 words, which is like a big book. You know, it's like 1984 by George Orwell was maybe 50,000 words. So Satoshi wrote 80,000 words, and there's one spelling mistake in all those words. Like, there's barely any grammatical errors. He was so meticulous. And if you read Craig Wright's blog, you know, he just isn't anything like as meticulous as Satoshi was.
Right.
Also, like, even though Satoshi created about the most libertarian thing that's ever been created in the history of man, the actual sentiment, Satoshi was quite apolitical. He always avoided talking about politics. He let the libertarian, what's the word, evangelists do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, he avoided it. And when the WikiLeaks thing broke, and they started paying Assange, when Assange got cut off, PayPal got cut off, and they started paying Assange in PayPal, but with Bitcoin. And when that happened, Satoshi disappeared pretty soon after. So I always assumed he'd disappeared because he didn't want to get into trouble. But as it turns out, that was around about the time that that Dan Kleiman was taken into hospital. So it looks like it was Craig Wright, Kleiman, and a third person. And the three of them have this tulip trust that's together, that's tied up in the Seychelles. And one of them's got the key and the other one's got the hard disk or something like that. I don't really know the details. So, you know, it was a 2 or 3 man job. But I've stopped following it since I finished the book. I was like, I've done it now. I don't really care that much. But, you know, I have been approached to write another book that would heavily feature Craig Wright. And I've stood back from that for the moment. So I think to answer your question is partly part of him died, but it wouldn't surprise me if he just backed off for his own personal safety because of that WikiLeaks thing. And again, I haven't checked recently, but to my knowledge, none of Satoshi's coins have yet been touched. Now, it's extraordinary that much. He must have been mining other coins that he's been able to sell. But it's extraordinary that you would have 1.2 million Bitcoins, whatever it is, and not touch them, with Bitcoin at $20,000 bucks, $25,000 bucks. It's just extraordinary. And I don't believe any single person would have that amount of willpower. And so I can only assume that the reason they haven't been touched is because they're tied up in some way, whether it's by legal processes or by one person having the key, the other person having the disk, whatever it is. That's a more obvious explanation to me as to why they haven't been touched.
Yeah, you don't have to say it, but do you have a finger on who might the third person be, or is it just a guess that there
might
be?
I've forgotten.
Okay.
I think I've forgotten his name, but I think he might have died as well, and his girlfriend's got the keys or something like that.
Sure.
Matonis knows, but Matonis has long since stopped talking about it.
Yeah, I really struggle with the group versus the individual here, in terms of what comprises Satoshi. My heart says it's an individual, plugging away, figuring all this out, and my instinct there is how. My instincts are sometimes, completely wrong in these things. I don't know what's going to happen short term with Bitcoin price. My instincts are always wrong, up, down, left, right. But so I'm not saying I'm onto something, but like I always thought how it fit my disappearance, because I feel like that really helps with not speaking on it and commenting, not moving the coins. How did pass away. He was, one of the first to interplay and interact with Satoshi. And I didn't know if that was him, and you go over this in the book and you kind of discredit a lot of that.
He was it was Hal sock puppeting.
What do you mean in that case? What do you mean how sock puppetting?
Well, because it was like when the first post went up on
he's
the thing. It was like 3 days before anyone even replied.
right. So I thought that was Satoshi bumping himself via how.
Yeah, that's what I mean by sock puppeting.
And then giving himself a compliment, and also, you know, the two of them, Satoshi and Hal, had prophetic vision and ideas for the value of Bitcoin right away, which meant that they, to me, had contemplated this notion deeply upon launch.
Yeah, I mean they had, but it was a never-ending subject among the cypherpunks for like 15 or 20 years.
Yeah,
those guys were talking about it on the on those mailing lists.
Yep.
You know, it was the realization of a dream that they had thought was technologically not possible.
yeah. And when I vacillate to the group aspect, I think it's state, you know, state actors somewhere. You know,
Not competent.
Which is funny. Yeah, I get that. But I just, in terms of anytime you go more than one, you know, I think you're going to lose competency and security and privacy. And I can't imagine. Yeah, I'd only imagine that if there was more than one, or even if one, that this person is no longer with us. And part of me then goes to maybe this person was taken out by the state, or this group of people were taken out by the state for whatever that means. And maybe they didn't disappear voluntarily. There's I really recommend people check out the book. It's a fascinating read. Next thing I want to ask you is, so do you think
for sure Kleiman was heavily involved?
I haven't gone down that rabbit hole on him.
Yeah, and his writing style is not. He's got the necessary meticulousness.
And does he fit the age? You know, born in
like 55,
it fits all of that. 56.
It fits all of that.
That was very interesting. So do you think we are freer now than in the 1980s and 90s?
Well, there's two sides to that particular coin, because freedom takes many forms. And, you know, we were freer in Stone Age times than we are now. We were freer to go anywhere. Nobody told us what to do. You know, we were freer in 1900 when government was only 10% of GDP compared to what it is now, 40, 50%. But we're also more enabled now because of technology. So, you know, assuming a world that doesn't have COVID in it, we can fly anywhere we like, we can drive anywhere we like, we can talk to anyone anywhere in the world on our phones, we can send messages, we can make films, send pictures. So in that sense, you know, and, you know, before long, we'll probably be able to fly to the moon. So in that sense, we're freer than ever, than at any time in history, because we're more enabled. So I think a lot of the time, people who moan about lack of freedom, government being too big and all that, they forget another feature of our lives, which is the empowering nature of technology and how liberating that is. So because of new technology, in one sense, we're freer than we've ever been, but in the other, we're not, because, you know, 40, 50% of our labor is owned.
Yeah. What do you think of, you know, big tech and government and 2020, you know, the rise of the state? Do you know, I mean, the work is all about life after the state and sort of waking up, and what has maybe been the reaction to the books? And do you think people are waking up to the power of the state and how involved it is in our life?
The more that Bitcoin goes up, the more anti-state sentiment filters out. So it's a wonderful, wonderful device. I actually wrote a whole chapter in that book there, Daylight Robbery, which I ended up cutting out of the final thing because I thought it read better without it. But I now, with COVID having happened, I wish I'd kept it in, all about how tech will replace government services. And it's already starting to happen. It's like COVID has accelerated everything, but we see it like man with like all these track and trace apps, all these health apps. You know, soon driverless cars will replace public transport. Education, you know, education has gone remote. It's all going online. You know, how long before people go, well, actually, why do we need universities and Harvard and something? Like my son's just gone to Bristol University, which is one of the best universities in the UK. He's gone to his hall of residence. He's paying, you know, stupid amounts of money for his hall of residence and for his college, and he spends the whole time in his room doing his lessons online. Right. Why does he need to even leave his house? And why can't he just do it on the Khan Academy, which is free? Why is he spending all this money? It's stupid. And at the moment, he's just doing it because of the camaraderie of going to university and the networks he'll build up and all the rest of it. That's the only way I can justify it. But in terms of the actual education, you can't. And so all of these, you know, tech is replacing, you know, and you look at the market cap of Amazon and Apple, and it's more powerful than countries. Google,
right?
You know, so to Google, what is it? They're, you know, $1 trillion, $2 trillion companies. Those, you know, the UK is a $2 trillion economy, and the UK is like the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, and Google's almost as powerful as we are. It's more powerful than most of the small nations in Western Europe. It's extraordinary how powerful these tech companies are.
I would argue they're more powerful than the US. I mean,
possibly
they could turn off
the military.
Voices. They don't have the military, but yeah, I guess from a physical security standpoint. But if they could, yeah, I think that's the hot, obviously the hot button. But
yeah, I mean, our health service designed these health apps, and they tried to design them themselves, and they were a total disaster.
Right.
They should have just used Google, because Google pretty much had it already there. At which point, Google owns the health service. I wonder how much of your US military would be better designed if rather than design their own tech, they just got
how much of it already is though. You know, there's so much to play, because you know the CIA they seed, and the NSA they seed money a lot of this technology, and I believe they have access to it usually a decade or two before it gets commercialized and marketed. I don't know how much of the shares or ownership they have of these companies, and then vice versa. You know, Amazon stores and does all the clouds for these entities, right? So they have all the knowledge. They're writing the algorithms, the better algorithms for them. So I'm wondering if one co-ops the other, or if it's just a complete merger. And I'm betting on the tech. I would bet on the tech.
Probably, and they're just gradually merging. The other way is, like, if you look at in the lead up to the US election, like, you know, it was clear that big tech was on Biden's side. You know, big tech likes technocracy, with all the censorship and everything, you know, Twitter and Facebook and clamping down and fake news. You know, rightly or wrongly, big tech was on the side of the Democrats. And
you know, I would debate.
Is that wrong or not?
I don't. You know, I think
I saw
that's
you
the
wince
sentiment.
when I said it.
I debate on this, and I'm not left or right anymore. I try not to get involved in that sort of, but I like talking about it, but I'm not a fan of either one. And I think but I believe that they both work together, and that it's just a pendulum, and that, you know, when there was that dance between,
they were against Trump.
You know, Trump. But like you know, on one hand, the arguments in public, like, because I think it's kayfabe, so it's a fake fight. And I don't understand the Hall of Mirrors. Maybe that fake fight benefits Trump, even though they're quote unquote censoring him. That brings more attention to Trump. I don't understand who wins and loses in that argument per se. Who really gains? You know, I think Trump's, you know, bad publicity is good publicity, and he's trying to threaten them through that argument, which I think is his main lever of power against them. But I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just, I go through that whole gamut of, like, I don't know who.
Well, okay, maybe you're right about that. I'm not sure, and I'm not
because the algorithms in America. If you lead here is if you read something from a left-leaning and a mainstream media outlet, they'll say, you know, all the algorithms on Facebook promote right-leaning stories. And the fact checkers are now right-leaning organizations, and they'll say, you know, they'll disclose a meeting between Trump and Zuckerberg that didn't really get highlighted in the media. So both sides then play this Hall of Mirrors, where, you know, it's team sports, and they're all using known evidence to distort the story to their, and maybe one is right or wrong, I don't know, but I just find the whole thing a Hall of Mirrors, and I think it all just benefits the center power, which is the ownership and wealth of the state.
Well, you could be right about that, but for sure, the technology companies are doing the state favors,
sure,
in return for getting favors back.
That's the key, the state. That's where I go, the state is not left or right. The state is the state. And I don't know how the state uses its pawns. I mean, maybe this,
well, I think the state wanted Biden more than it wanted Trump.
Right, but I think
Biden's an old school technocrat.
Right, but there's the argument that the state didn't want Trump in 2016, but I saw in 2017 the state really cracked down and got a lot of what it wanted through tax cuts and different things along that line.
Yeah.
So I think they use that pendulum swing against us to rally, and to get what they want out of either team and team's administration. That's kind of my working hypothesis, that like the whole thing is a fake fight. And that they win on either side. They win on, because then, you have in 2016, the big fear was that we were going to be totalitarian. And now we're swinging back left. And on the left, you're getting all this kind of subtle socialism and kind of social democracy. So then you kind of, the fight against, let's say right-wing totalitarianism is bringing you a lot of centralized power and decision-making around things like, the cancel culture, which is more of the left than the right. So it's very
sure, but that's a totalitarian thing in itself.
Right. So what I'm saying, the argument against totalitarianism and the solution against totalitarianism is to run left and have more centralized power and totalitarianism. So I don't know who's really winning because I think it's a generational thing from the center of power. And I think all of that, so these 4-year fights in either direction are just used to have us swinging back and forth and get more out of us. So it's kind of turning to that. One thing is kind of a blind spot for myself is Brexit, and where are you guys with Brexit, and where is it going? Hi. Oh,
I don't know what happened.
No worries. I was going to turn it.
But yeah,
I don't know if you heard my last question.
Yeah. I didn't quite hear the last question. So if you put in the last question and then
sure,
we'll pick up from there.
I'd love to turn it to Brexit. It's a blind spot for me. Like I said, I don't really follow all these things. I followed it a little bit more in the beginning. I've really kind of tuned out a bit. I still come across headlines and things, but where are you guys?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Right?
No, the state is the vote happened in 2016. Nobody's expecting the majority of people to vote to leave the European Union, but rather nobody was expecting Trump to win. The majority of the UK did vote to leave the European Union. The state then did everything in its power to undermine it and stop it and derail it, but somehow or other it got through. It took a couple of general elections, and changes of power, and now it's going through, but it's going through in nothing like as pure a form as those who voted for it wanted it to be, and it's much more muddied and one of the things we were supposed to do is we had to give all our waters to the European Union after we joined the EU in 1974, and it put all our fishermen out of business. And one of the things we were supposed to do is reclaim our waters, and that hasn't happened. So the whole thing's been muddied, but there is now a deal. And I think we've already left. And I think the transition period ends at the end of January, and then we're out and the new chapter begins.
Interesting. I don't know a lot about it, but what I frame it up under is sort of localism and sort of like a return to sort of local sovereignty.
That's the overriding reason given to leave was sovereignty.
Right. Now, but what I don't know is second and third order effects and whether that gets achieved. I just don't know, because you talk about all these trade deals, and I don't follow it. I'm not sure if it's actually benefiting England, if things are getting different, harder, and maybe,
I don't know. And I'm hoping that the predictions of the book, The Sovereign Individual, great book if you've ever read that.
Yep.
That nations were built up around after the Industrial Revolution, when the workforce was centered in certain geographical areas, and the economy was very easy to tax. Laborers were easy to tax, and businesses were easy to tax. But now the workforce, the economy is going much more digital and virtual, and the workforce is much disparate. The workforce no longer needs to be centralized in cities, for example. It's going to become much harder to tax, and as a result, we're going to slowly see nations as we once knew them going bust, and new nations forming, and new borders and so on. So I'm hoping that happens, and Brexit's part of that process, and it's something I address in this book. But the governments have got a big problem on their hands around the world, is that they've got these colossal amounts of debts, these colossal obligations, not just the debts, but the pledges they've made to spend on various things, whether it's the military or healthcare or education. Those services looking out of date in a modern context. Why is education taking the form it currently takes when we now have the internet? Government's biggest source of income is income tax. 50% of government revenue comes from income tax around the world, roughly. And income tax is going to be harder to collect because more and more people are going freelance. It's harder to collect income tax off freelancers than it is from workers, where you collect the tax at source. And more workers are traveling. Digital nomads is the fastest growing workforce in the world. Where do they pay tax? Who do they pay tax to? How much tax do they pay? So while on the one hand, government obligations are out of control, on the other hand, government revenue is prejudiced. And so one of the ways governments are dealing with this is by inflating. And then, but workers are just going to look at that and go, well, if they're inflating, I'm going to buy Bitcoin. And then once you're in the Bitcoin economy, Bitcoin is the pin, it's not the bubble. It exposes what a sham fiat money is. And I just think this guy, Michael Saylor, who's come along, it's like, he's like a savior from God. He's come along at just the right time. He's put all this corporate money into Bitcoin, 1.3 billion, whatever it is. He's almost doubled his money. I think he bought in at average price of 16,000. We're at 27,000 as we speak. Every other corporate entity that's sitting on shed loads of cash and watching it, disappear, watching its purchasing power decrease at 10% per annum, is going to go, fuck. Now Michael Saylor's done it. We've all got to do it. And once corporate money starts going into Bitcoin, the sky's the limit. Yeah. It really is. And it's just all the dominoes have lined up. 2020 has been the most incredible year it's accelerated everything.
Separating your two worlds, in the Money Week world, what has the feedback been on Bitcoin lately? Has it really percolated?
Well, the problem with the Money Week audience is quite old, so they're more gold than Bitcoin. There's a few Money Week readers who own it and so on. They tend to be the younger ones, but they've all got their stock brokerage account, and they like things they can buy in their stock brokerage account, and they're a bit bamboozled by, ledger keys and wallets, and they're scared of being hacked and so on. So they tend to favor gold. There's a massive core readership that likes gold. And so even though I've been banging the drum on Bitcoin for God knows how long, they perhaps haven't bought as much as they should have done. But that said, we're way ahead of things like the Financial Times, which has spent the last 10 years telling you Bitcoin shit. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just extraordinary how wrong the Financial Times has been. The Financial Times doesn't even like gold. I mean, God, it's just so full of such idiots. But anyway.
What about your collaborators in entertainment? Do they read your book maybe like before they meet you, or talk to you about your book, even if they haven't read it, and ask you weird questions that are uninformed?
There's a few guys that own Bitcoin, but most of them, in most cases, they'll go, "Oh, somebody told me about that in 2014. I wish I'd bought it." Right. And then they don't buy it, and then up it goes. There are some guys who are a bit more canny, but it takes effort. That's the thing about Bitcoin. It takes effort. You've got to learn what it is. You've got to learn the tech. You've got to do this. And most people, a lot of people dismiss it because they go, "Oh, I don't understand it." Well, just because you can't be bothered to try and understand it doesn't mean it isn't any good. And it's just by going, "I don't understand it," it's an easy way to just rid yourself of the responsibility of investing in it.
Right. What about the future of Hollywood? And what I mean by that is sort of, I mean, Hollywood being the center or the voice of entertainment or kind of culture, and especially in this world where on-site physical location shooting is probably dwindled, if not diminished completely. Where does entertainment
Well,
go?
it's not something about which I can really hold court about with any great level of insight. But I will say this about Hollywood: it's full of extremely clever people. Some of the cleverest people in the world grow up wanting to be in the entertainment industry in some way, and they migrate to Hollywood as a result. So whether it's on the business side or on the technical side or on the creative side, it is full of geniuses. It is full of clever people. Now, the other thing that Hollywood understands is business. And, we have an expression in the UK, I'm sure you have the same expression in the US, get woke, go broke. And, Hollywood's got all up this stupid woke stuff, and audiences just don't want it and they're not buying it. So sooner or later, the entertainment industry is so up its own backside with all its woke shit. And, there's people from their palaces in Beverly Hills talking about, how we lecturing some white working class bloke who's never had anything in his whole life about privilege, telling him he's privileged. And you're like, but he's got nothing. And you're telling him he's privileged. He's just fuck off. I just don't want to hear this shit. And so I think it needs to change its ethos, but it will adapt. It's just there's too many clever people working there for it not to adapt. And it's already adapting now. Netflix, more, Hollywood's not spending so much money on films. It's going down the Netflix route. It's going down the streaming route. I think cinemas are pretty much dead. COVID, they were dying anyway, but COVID's killed them off. And maybe we'll get this James Bond film that's been put off for about a year now. Maybe we'll get that in 2021. So it'll adapt. You just look at the standard of some of the stuff that's on Netflix, some of the miniseries and so on. They're brilliant, some of them. And Hollywood will it's already doing it. It'll go there. But I mean, people want stories, and they're going to want stories told in the best possible way by the best possible storytellers. But the challenge is finding your audience and it making money. But there's so many arseholes in Hollywood. I really don't care if they all go and do one.
Right. I'm kind of really curious what your thoughts on 2020 are, and maybe what 2021 might bring.
Well, I think I would say $50,000 Bitcoin, pretty much. I mean, it's not even a double from where we are. I mean, every double is increased. Each double is harder than the last one. The double from 4,000 to 8,000 in the spring was a much easier double than the double from 25,000 to 50,000. But, it's in such an extraordinary bull market, and the narrative is so strong. And, this new corporate Bitcoin's fantastic at reinventing its own narratives. So, but, it's hot. When sentiment gets too hot, it'll do one of it's in a parabolic phase at the moment, and we don't quite know how long the parabolic phase will go on for. I think a lot of the shit coins need to start going parabolic as well before this particular phase is over. So that makes me think this run's still got legs, even though it's looking fairly mature. It'll probably top maybe in the spring, May, something like that. And then we'll go into another crypto winter. But long term, it's just the fundamentals for Bitcoin are really good. I think I quite like the way gold's looking at the moment. I think commodities are looking really good generally. As soon as they open the doors and everyone can start traveling again, oil's got to have a run. And maybe we'll even see.
Do you think that happens? Do you think people start traveling again?
Well, I don't think we'll ever go back to what we were in 2019.
I came into this year probably more optimistic about just a year in general for the world than I ever have been. I'm always optimistic for myself. And it was a stressful year at first. And for me, it was probably the greatest year of my life. And each one seems to be. So I like that. But it was a stressful year, I think, for the world. And I think now in December, speaking about price and stuff and where we are and Michael Saylor and Cyber Hornets and 27K, it's exciting. But I think we're maybe in the eye of the storm. I'm a lot less optimistic for what the world might go through in 2021 in a macro level. For myself, again, I'm sure it's going to be the best year ever. No matter what comes my way, I now have tools to come and deal with that. And I'm sharpening those tools all the time. But I'm not sure what 2021 brings. And I'm not as optimistic as I was coming into 2020. And with that, I'll leave it to you with any parting words.
I don't know, Cedric. What worries me is that governments around the world have set this new precedent that they can shut down economies.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, you can argue to the end of the day about whether the measures to deal with COVID were the right choices, But a lot of that data was disingenuous. It was badly presented. It was misleading, and there was a lot of confirmation bias going on. It was like all those people in those health departments had been waiting for the global pandemic for years, and finally here was their chance. But anyway, precedents have been set, and the evidence of daylight robbery is that any time in history when there's a crisis, government power grows, taxes go up. Tax is a measure of government's involvement in the economy. And when the crisis has passed, they never go back to the levels they were before the crisis started. They come back a little bit, but they don't go back to where they were. Look at, before 1942, Americans didn't pay income tax. And then you got the Revenue Act of 1942, and suddenly income tax exists for every man. It existed for higher earners, but not for ordinary Americans. And it stayed. And so we have lost a lot of freedoms in 2020. And I wonder if we'll ever get them back.
Yeah.
And, at what point now we've got this sort of health and safety attitude, something bad might happen. We've got to shut down the economy and we'll print money to compensate. Now that is normal now. And that is deeply concerning. Just ordinary shit like wearing masks. Like I don't like masks. I don't like being you can't make contact with people when they're wearing
I don't even like
masks.
Halloween because of the masks.
Yeah. But you look at somebody, you go, is that guy smiling at me, or is he? Because your eyes narrow when you smile.
It's very dehumanizing.
Yeah, you can't. There's so much.
I really worry about the effects of that.
Yeah, and so all these things are very concerning, and I think you've just made me sit up a little bit because I keep assuming this will pass, but you wonder if it ever will.
No, I mean, I think in a lot of ways it was a test run.
Where are you in the world?
Outside of Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a test run. I think that that we've made the argument. Here's the thing. Here's what my thought was before that. There were a lot of choices to be made this year, and I made some good choices, and I made a lot of bad choices. What I learned by that is I don't want anyone making choices for me, and I don't want to make choices for you because I'm not going to get them right for you. I can't get them right for you. And I barely get them all right for me, and there's sometimes serendipity in a wrong choice, and people are allowed to make a bad choice. But I think that the great argument, not being the reasoned argument, but that the argument of the zeitgeist is that, some choices need to be made for everybody. And if another crisis comes along, and there always is another crisis, and they always do seem to get bigger and greater. And part of that is I think that, Twitter and Facebook are production outlets like CNN and HBO. It's more, I think the algorithm itself is a production element of Hollywood, and that they gravitate towards these perfectly coalesce, these stories that just epitomize both sides. And we coalesce around them as a world, more or less, every so often. So there's going to be another universal sort of unifying event or panic or fear or crisis. And the rollout, like you said, the red carpet for the rollout has already been laid down. The argument has been made. And I think that's coming. Now, my optimism, the root of my optimism is that the state can't pull anything off at the end because it's a failure of humans. And that's why I want humans less involved in my own decisions. So my optimism comes over the long term that things will be sorted out, either by our success or their failures or a combination. But in the short term, I'm very concerned about what's coming in the new year. And I think we have a moment of reprieve here. I hope I'm wrong.
Well, we're in a they've invented this new thing called, they've put the parts of the UK in tiers. So we had lockdown, we were free or we had lockdown.
Right.
And then they invented these tiers 1, 2, and 3, depending on how severe the thing, the COVID was. And now they've invented another tier 4, and they've put everyone in tier 4.
I couldn't imagine, like you were
it's
saying,
just
your son's in
it
college.
makes yeah.
And I frame that up now. Like I doubt my kids are going to college. Like I went to college and the economics were a lot different, but I had a really good time and a fantastic education, but it was really 99% good time, 1% education. I could have learned all that at an apprenticeship, in 3 months after college, working on the job. And now you're in this place where, it's $7.99 a month for Netflix, $8.99 a month for Hulu, $9.99 a month for YouTube, $59.99 a month for Google College, and $50,000 a year for Harvard. And they're all subscriptions. So, and you can get it all free. It's all data information, unless you're in the classroom at Harvard rubbing elbows with, the future masters of the universe that are going to be your Rolodex connections. Like, you're going to wake up next year and be like, maybe I don't need to go there. Maybe I'll just get the online version, or I'll get this on YouTube at the local library.
Well, this is the changeover phase that we're in.
Yeah, but there's second and third order effects to all this. Like we're saying, I mean, people then are in their houses. I couldn't imagine right now if I was 22 years old and someone was like, "No, you couldn't go to a bar tonight and meet your future ex-wife." Not that I met my wife in a bar, but you know what I mean? Like, no, you can't go out there and find some serendipity. You can't go do these things that are like, you can't start your life. Sometimes you're a freshman in college. Like, it's just maybe it's a chance to get, maybe it is the social thing. You're 18 years old. You're like, I want to get out of my hometown. Everyone around here is a wanker. I want to go meet some new people. Not happening this year, son. World's shut down. You're going to wait for next year to meet those friends and people that you want to hang out with. And I worry about all this and the power.
It's horrible what they're doing to kids. The things they've taken away from kids.
Yeah. I mean, isolation is what they do in jail. And we're all, under home isolation in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, you could say, yeah, go out, go run, go to the mountains, go wherever you want to go. But there are less people in these places. There are less places to go. I mean, stand-up comedy to me, oh my gosh, like my father was a comic, before he settled down, and I was raised on comedy, and that is, the best truth spoken to power that you ever get, and that could get squashed in this whole thing.
It's already been squashed.
Yeah, because I'm not tuning in to a live stand-up show. The part that's the struggle with the stand-up comedy I had with the internet was like, don't play my jokes after you saw them in the club. Like, I got to tell that joke in Kentucky next week, whatever. I mean, the live thing was the moment.
Yeah. Well, comedy adapted, as Hollywood will. But what's happened now with comedy is, like, they tried to reopen the clubs, but they were they were only at 30% of the capacity that they were previously at.
Yeah,
so everyone sat really far apart.
Yeah, it doesn't work. You can't do that. Nothing works like that. But it's interesting. Like, I read a book like No Logo and Chomsky back in the day, and you think about, like, my big problem with tech in the beginning was, I want to go to the public town square. That's where you can meet. That's where people, the activists and the morons and idiots, and they can hand out their pamphlets, and there's conversation and debate. And that moved to the malls, right? And they cleaned up Times Square and they cleaned up all these areas, and it just got privatized. And you can't go to the mall and hand out your stupid pamphlet or your brilliant pamphlet, right? And you can't go to the mall and shout your thing. And you know, because it's private, it's private. And now it's moved to Amazon.com. And it's moved to Twitter.com. So it's just way more regulated and controlled. And I think outside of Bitcoin Twitter, I don't think there's much organic things coming across people's plate in the world. I don't mean to get terribly pessimistic.
I really like, one of the things that I got excited about in 2016 was decentralized social media. This idea that we were going to have decentralized Twitter, decentralized.
I still think it's going to happen. I still think it's going to happen.
And then it just
not through
where the fuck is it?
Shitcoins, but it's going to happen.
Well,
that's my dream.
We really need it.
We really need it, and soon. Like and
maybe, and I'm told that the technology exists and it works.
I'm convinced it does.
But we don't have the network. Like, one of the reasons.
I'm convinced that you put it on Lightning and pay a tweet, a like. 10 sats alike. I'm convinced there's a model like this that works.
Like that.
I've heard the argument that the economics of the transaction don't work because you're not going to contemplate this small amount of money for this transaction. But I don't think of it as like buying a coffee. It's just a like button. You won't even think about the money. But the fact that it costs you money is you're voting with your money now. You're not just going to like something you disagree with or whatever it might be. But I'm imagining there's got to be an interplay of technology there that we can get that petri dish.
But what none of these things have, like YouTube, what they all did, they all built up. The value of all those companies is their network, the extraordinary networks they have. And that's why Bitcoin, one of the main reasons Bitcoin has beaten all the other coins so comprehensively this past year, is that it had first mover advantage, but it just got this extraordinary network. So even if, Bitcoin Cash does move coins faster, or another thing, you can build apps on it better, whatever it is, Bitcoin's got the network. And YouTube built up its extraordinary network by allowing people to post anything. It was a total free-for-all. Copyright didn't matter. Then as soon as YouTube had the monopoly, then suddenly it was all in bed with governments. Yeah, copyright this, intellectual property that. And so suddenly that freedom has gone, and now it's got the network.
It's a honey trap.
Of course it is. And Vimeo's better than YouTube, but Vimeo couldn't compete with it because it didn't have that free for all. And now Vimeo's like a specialist thing for filmmakers who want to post their videos in better content than YouTube. And it just has this air of professionalism that YouTube doesn't have. But so somehow we've got to invent to take those networks. I just don't believe somebody's going to, everyone's doing this Parler thing instead of Twitter. It's just not as good.
Right.
And it's like we've got to invent a new type of network that it's, because Twitter owns, arguing or speech or whatever Twitter's for. And Facebook owns showing pictures of your wife and kids and all that shit. Facebook owns they've each got, LinkedIn owns business and networking, whatever, and somebody's got to find a way of owning these new things. It's different to like Facebook. Just Facebook was much better than MySpace, and do you know what I mean? It just, and so it's gonna be very hard to steal Twitter's network. You've just got to come along and do something similar but better, I guess. I don't know.
He does own Square, or I shouldn't say he, but Jack Dorsey's involved in both Twitter and Square, and I hope there's maybe even a short-term interplay there that builds us towards a more decentralized future. I don't know what Jack Dorsey's true beliefs and intentions are around both his feelings around Bitcoin and how it plays into his businesses in the future. I'm curious to see what he does. And I don't know how much control he actually has over Twitter. I believe that he doesn't have much control over Twitter. And so I don't know how much his public actions relate to his inner, beliefs.
Well, he's definitely kowtowing to a woke ideology.
It's something.
That
I think it's money. And because I don't think he has enough ownership.
Maybe he realizes he needs to lose that particular battle. Maybe, a bit like Peter Thiel and PayPal. Like PayPal is the most Peter Thiel's a libertarian, but PayPal is not a libertarian.
They bent
thing.
the knee.
Yeah.
Peter Thiel's really interesting. I can't get over that conversation I had with Eric Weinstein about, just how much has really changed since the 70s, in our homes. And to some extent, I think he's right. I don't think there's been a lot different in our homes besides the screens. And you can argue that the screens are then pervasive and change a lot of things in our internal lives. But you walk into a house and it's kind of a house from the 70s or 80s. Maybe the art decor is a little different. The car's a little rounder, maybe. I'm curious.
You go and you look around old museums, and you look in people's houses in Victorian times or even earlier than that. You look in the old king's houses. We still need to eat, drink, shit.
Right.
We still need to do the same things
I
that
hear
we always
you.
needed to do.
Yeah, this has been so incredible, Dominic. I'm really glad that somehow I got connected to you and came across your work. It's been eye-opening, and I really enjoy it. And you got I think, just a keen perspective on things.
Well, it's great, and I'm very good at producing content, and I'm terrible at marketing.
You are. You're prolific. You are prolific. I mean, I usually get through every single letter and note, and musical note of every person I speak to, and I couldn't cover all the ground. And I recommend, we barely touched the books. So I really recommend people go out and read, Daylight Robbery.
Daylight Robbery is my magnum opus.
Okay,
that's the one I want everyone to read.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think it's been released in America. You can buy it on Amazon.
Yeah,
but it's not. It hasn't got a proper release in the United States.
Life After the State, really, that hit hard for me. Daylight Robbery as well, but I read that one first, so they kind of. It's hard to separate which one,
okay.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I think they're all fantastic. And I think you should re-release the Bitcoin Future of Money, add a chapter, update it, something, because that should get out and needs wider attention. It's a really great book. And I think it's extremely just relevant for what it is then now. So I don't see it as, something from 2014. It really just boosted how amazing there was a lot. We talked a little about it earlier. Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to downplay it. Safe pulled a lot from your book. Everyone pulled a lot from your book. What I was trying to say is, even though they pulled a lot from your book, they're all great additions to your book.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah. And, because your book had Yap Islands in it, is one of my favorite kind of things Safe goes over in his book. And that was what was interesting to me is I don't know if I came across.
Did he use that? I didn't know that.
I think, or maybe it was in VJ's article, but either way, I came across that not in your work. And then your work was obviously published before wherever I came across it. So I thought, and that's one of the reasons I kept going back to the copyright date, because everybody, I think you said it well. Everyone, they're all pulling from your book. And that's why I think it should be republished and get the attention it deserves now. Not that it didn't then, but now, because it stands with them. And a lot of these books, like you said, are built on top of. So, and I think all three are great. And then you have a whole wider world. The music is so much fun. I usually don't do lots of parody music, but I had a good time. So I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Yeah. Well, you're very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dominic.
Take care, Cedric.
You too.
See you.
Bitcoin OG, Dominic Frisby, sharing straight fire about life after the state, Bitcoin, the future of money, and his magnus opus, Daylight Robbery, right here on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. And thank you for listening. If you dig the chats, subscribe, like, rate, and review our YouTube channel and whatever app you dome your pods on. That's the best way to help us get the word out so we can keep grinding out thought-provoking conversations about Bitcoin. This is Cedric. Peace.